It's time for Cutting Edge Consciousness with Freeman Michaels and Barnet Bain. Thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
I want to talk about Occupy Wall Street. You know, it's in the news. It's everywhere.
Sure
There's
is.
Occupy LA, Occupy New York, Occupy virtually every city. And there's a lot of energy behind it. And I want to get your thoughts. I mean, it's interesting because as it pops up as my mirror, it reflects back to me, you know, pieces within myself that can jump onto a cause and can jump into all these ways I get triggered. And my goal right now is to back off the trigger, watch them all come up, and then watch what my collective that I'm experiencing around me, this whole, you know, sort of way in which I view the world. My worldview starts coming up, and my middle class belief structures and my injustice, trigger gets going, and I'm feeling myself triggered on all these different levels, and I'm not doing anything about it. I mean, I know I'm wise enough at this point to sit back and go, wow. But to see it coming, when there's a huge swell of folks energetically charged the way this is, it's important to take note. Personally, what does that mean to me? What's showing up for me? And I'm curious for you, what's going on with all this Occupy Wall Street for you, Barnet? What's happening in your experience of it?
I'm really aware of a crisis, a personal crisis.
Sure.
For me, it's a positive crisis personally, but I'm aware that it hasn't always been so.
Sure.
I'm aware that there is a crisis for me personally, and a crisis in the culture and in the world. It's a crisis of character and a crisis of dignity and a crisis of empowerment. And that this speaks to a coarseness, a sense of polarity. There is a unwillingness to engage in honoring one's own dignity and honoring the dignity of another. There isn't a civility. It shows up in me as an individual to the degree that I am estranged from the fragments of me that have one agenda or another. My willingness to make myself wrong, or to go into self-judgment, or to go into righteousness, as opposed to beginning to create a safety for myself, an understanding, a compassionate understanding of that I am a complex individual with many thoughts and many feelings, all existing simultaneously. Let me finish the thought.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And that this also has a correlate in the outer world.
Absolutely.
And when we see that we cannot have a discussion where there are grays, and that we are so triggered by one another that we cannot listen to a view, a seemingly, and I say seemingly,
right,
opposing view, without getting triggered and trying to annihilate the messenger. When we turn on the television and we see pundits who don't listen to each other but are glazed over, reviewing their talking points for the next opportunity that they could interrupt, and they don't offer the presence or the dignity to allow for some happy accident that occurs when you make a space of civility to entertain other ideas and other energies. So as I see it, the Occupy Wall Street, it's very tempting to get caught up at the level of form of complaint. I'm more empowered personally when I drill down to see what is this a symptom of. The Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party are both expressing a sense of being, of having no voice of being excluded from decision making, of being marginalized as kooks and hysterics, or hoodlums of some kind, being stereotyped. Nobody is saying to these, nobody is looking at this. To me, they are symptoms of the same malaise that says we are not being honored.
Yeah.
We are not being attended to. We're being dismissed, and we have concerns. And when we begin to drill below the surfaces of these concerns, even our political discourse, right and left, Republican and Democrat, when we drill below who is, it becomes particularly obvious in presidential years. When we drill below, does people really believe that the left or the right wants anything less in terms of meaningful relationships, satisfying work and liberty and a sense of freedom and character and dignity for themselves?
They have to if they want to perpetuate the story they're telling. And look, so much of this. So here's the deal. If you ask me, because I love, and I'm guessing very quickly we're going to pull into how do I own the part of me being reflected back in this experience, the part of me that doesn't feel like I have a voice, the part of me that feels like I've been marginalized.
That's
aspects
a piece of it.
me.
But I think you and I and most of the people who have listened to this show are already pretty adept and adroit at owning that.
Well,
but what we're not so adept and adroit at is having a compassionate understanding and being willing to dwell in the awkwardness of being the strong arms of inclusion, where there is no obvious solution, yet we hold the space.
That's it.
We are not. That is my personal growth edge of not having to have an answer, not having to have a solution, but simply being extending an active caring for all the parties that is born out of a personal understanding that comes from, frankly, sorrow and struggle.
Yes.
I've been there, and now I don't want to play the game in the same way of moving around the furniture on the deck, on the deck chairs on the boat, but I do want to own what the boat is floating on. And there is not a lot of dignity that's going on, and maybe I can bring to it in my own way the dignity of not stereotyping people and being able to reconcile the paradox. Where it looks like disparate interests, but when you drill down, the interests are the same. People have different ideas about how to go about it, but the interests are the same. And what we know about, again, those that follow this show, what we know about reality creation is that it is the intentional vibration of something that has power.
Yeah.
So the intention to provide safety and dignity, to provide a sense of security and well-being, the intention, left or right, that is what has power. But when it gets siphoned off into, I need to be right more than I need to be happy, then we have a very unfortunate situation. But I can relate to it because I know the parts of myself that have done that for years.
That's right. And for me, these little wars within, we've brought that up before, that then come glaring in these things. I can attach all of this residual juice. I can attach it to this. And
then we become righteous.
And then we become righteous. And then we have a position, and there's an us and there's a them, and this, it's very toxic. I mean, it's very toxic for me to begin to get into that dance, if you will. It's so easy. And it's so...
Well, we have a lot of brain chemistry.
That's
there
right.
Many
a lot
reasons,
of wiring.
Just at the physical, never mind the metaphysical. At the physical level, we have a lot of wiring, and we have a lot of chemistry, and a lot of myelination,
Yes.
and the energy fires that way. Very
And
good
very
for us
quickly.
to put attention on it. Energy follows attention. To put the attention on it so that when you hit the knee, it doesn't just jerk forward automatically. You put attention on it so that it can take a moment and maybe fire some new brain patterns
That's right.
that are not readily discharging something new. It requires a moment. We need to slow it down.
That's right.
And does that mean that the whole thing is going to resolve into can't we all just get along? Well, maybe not initially, and maybe not ever, but to join the fray and to keep
Exacerbating the
keep
behavior.
up behaviors.
Yeah.
And by behaviors, I don't mean do not become a Tea Partier or do not become an Occupy Wall Street person. That's not the case at all. If that's where you're at, then I am talking about holding a place of allowance and care and compassion and an empathy for what is making people are hurt.
That's
and
it.
They're
That's
angry.
it. And to own that individually, the part of me that's coming up in this moment, it isn't invalidating it. It's not a spiritual bypass. I'm not checking out of it. I'm watching the part of me coming up and being reflected back in whatever circumstances I happen to be plugged into in the moment. And right now it's that one. Don't worry, there's always something that's going to get me at that place where I get in, the whole injustices, all the injustices of my life, all the injustices
All the
come
second,
roaring
all
in.
the first story.
All the first story stuff comes roaring forward, all comes roaring in the moment.
And
There's
it's
an
developmental.
opportunity
That first story stuff
to
is
point to it and say,
real,
that's where it is.
and it's
it is
real,
It is real.
and it's first
And
story.
there are injustices in the world. And there is, yes, now I'm going, now I'm hooked. Versus coming at it from the perspective that you're talking about, where we can hold something that has complexity.
I
where
have
we
a
can
lot of
hold
grief
something.
about it.
Yeah.
I have a lot of sorrow about it. And to dive in at the level of that kind of activism in where I am in my own life and how I hold it, not to make others right or wrong. It doesn't work it is not the most empowering thing for me to do. But for where I am to be with my sorrow around it, to be with my empathy, to understand the parts of me that are triggered, and to have compassion for those outside of me who are being dismissed. I get very triggered when I hear one side or the other dismiss Tea Partiers or dismiss people who are passionately expressing feelings, who are not just in denial or flatland, like so many of us, who have but who are so passionate and are dealing in the best way that they can deal, and who have an aliveness and who believe in that kind of activism. To hear them dismissed as anarchists or layabouts, it triggers me because I know how quickly I can dismiss aspects of myself or others.
That's right.
With some kind of hostile. So nothing changes until I do.
That's it.
And there's no amount of protesting on one side or the other on any issue until I do. And then when I do, the activism in the world becomes a follow-through.
It becomes more constructive. It actually then can move in the direction of something that is positive. Something can come out of it.
And maybe I expect that something positive is going to come out of this. And my contribution,
I agree with you.
My personal contribution at this point, it may change.
Yeah.
But today, at this minute, on this show, on this program, right now, my personal contribution is to feel what comes up for me. And to hold a space of care and compassion and understanding to the best of my ability.
That's it. And I have to say this. There's this huge part of me, Barnet, that wants to take a position, that wants to know something, that's ready to leap in. And I want to be able to allow for that part to come up, without necessarily acting on it, because I know it would be in my mind, it would be it wouldn't be the most empowering thing. That I see it all coming up. Wow, there's all these places that I can, and I can step into something that has that's very action oriented. That's an active choice. I can take a stand, for example, with a sense of the aspect of me taking that stand, not the whole of me, not the only way, not the positioning that you were talking about, where it's a position and now I'm right. The minute I lock into that, I'm sunk personally. But if I allow for a voice to come up, and I say it even this way, I have even language for it, there's a part of me, roar,
Yeah,
then it becomes very constructive. Because it allows for other parts of me, and it allows for other people to have their experience, and I don't have to be right.
And at that point,
I wasn't raised that way. I was raised with all that.
I don't know anybody who is raised that way. I don't know anybody who is raised that way, and that's okay, because it's clear to me that the reason that I am alive is to love and grow, but not to reaffirm what was, but to learn what will.
Evolutionary process,
and it's a developmental.
So the idea that there's nothing to look back at to say that's the way one ought to do it, but to look forward and say, how do I want to create this? Is brilliant.
To look back and understand a context, which I can include and transcend.
Yes.
But I don't want to leave it behind any more than I want to leave my ego behind. People always talk about crushing their ego. How are you going to open the door? How am I going to drive my car without an ego? How am I going to I'm going to find the ignition and put the key in?
Your ego is very important for lots of things.
But I don't want it making choices or assigning meaning.
That's it.
Any more than I want
you want to make certain choices. You want to make certain choices, but there's a lot.
I don't want to make any choices. I want to make the choices.
I agree with you.
I want it to report. I want it to say, Freeman is here.
Yes.
Are you ready? Everything and Spence is here, and we can start the show. I want to choose. I don't want my ego.
I agree with you.
Making choices or assigning meaning.
No, that's right. That's right.
Nor do I want any fragments of myself making choices or assigning
That's what I was saying
earlier. They
earlier.
did that when it was age and developmentally appropriate.
Yeah.
And it's not now for me.
Yeah.
I'm not presumptuous enough. I'm pretty presumptuous, but I'm not presumptuous enough to suggest that I know for other people. But for me, this is where I am.
We've talked about this in terms of particular stories. That there's a story, for example, that I can really juice up the story. And I'm willing to allow that as a personal expression, but that it's only one story. That there's a whole myriad of stories going on at the same time.
But we do it. The reason we do it, is because when we start juicing and feeding attention into it, we're feeding energy into a story. There is a vitality that happens. There's aliveness.
That's right.
When people jump out of aircraft and stuff, when people find any opportunity to feed massive amounts of energy as a follow-through to where they place their attention. When the whole of the outer world supports your place of attention, your target of attention, the energy that floods in at the level of usually righteousness or self-abandonment, that's what we have beauty for on the other side. And it is a powerful offsetting force. One little bit of love and beauty is dynamite next to a whole lot of negativity. So if we didn't have that moderating force of beauty, of compassion, of care, we would be sunk. And fortunately, I don't believe we are going to be sunk. We're going to be.
No, it's interesting because I love the way we started this show with you saying about crisis and inviting in the crisis, and feel very encouraged that, wow, this is coming to a boiling head. It's time for this aspect of my experience as an individual and as the collective.
I see it as a crisis of success, personally.
I agree.
A spiritual crisis.
I agree.
It's a crisis that precipitates me to be, my focus and attention, and makes very clear where I could veer off and how the many ways that I can veer off, and the options that that are more clear to me now than ever before, and that I am attending and expecting and imagining will become ever more clear and ever more empowered as I continue to feed it energy, that allows me to be more at choice and more causal. And eventually the highest magic is choice itself. But right now it involves certain kinds of cognitions, emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual. And I am not as easily seduced or distracted by the appearances of things. And I am more interested in what is down below that.
That's it. Is to understand the fragmented pieces coming up in particular ways as expressions in the world. Own them. And even ride them in a particular way. That's fine. You allow for that to come out. Here's a way that's coming out.
Ride them, but don't let them ride you.
Well, you as a storyteller have the opportunity to tell a story. You can tell it from a vantage point. And you can do that as an expression of an aspect of you. And nobody dies. And in fact, it can be very clean and very beautiful just as a single expression.
Yeah.
Not to tie everything into it, to allow it to be a thread.
Sometimes you get tied up in certain stories at this point, and people do die. So there are very big stakes now, not to be frightening or anyway, because I believe it's a self-empowering opportunity.
Sure.
But all of the energy and charge that goes behind certain stories, they do precipitate calamity. And people do die, and people do get hurt, or people do lose dignity emotionally or spiritually or physically, or they lose all.
Yeah.
But you take away somebody's dignity, you take away everything. You might as well take their life. You take away everything. When somebody becomes hopeless and helpless, you take away everything. And when you when people marginalize each other and make them invisible or stereotype them, we have built a resonance around that is no longer sustainable.
That's huge.
And these things they have to be discharged first on an individual basis, not out there. Not to say that what's happening out there is good, bad, or otherwise. It's appropriate for whoever is doing whatever they're doing. But I personally want to look inside and see where I am complicit in that.
That's right.
Where it fits in with my belief system. Where that is a complete jigsaw puzzle in the matrix of my belief
of
and
your
my
experience.
thoughts.
Absolutely.
And I want to just put the clutch in on it.
Yeah. And at the same time, allow it out in various ways that are constructive versus destructive. Allow these parts of me to get fired up, and I go on the ride, and then I go, wow, that was an interesting
Take all that
ride.
energy and you know, the way martial arts do that two-step. You take all that energy, you turn it around, and you discharge it into creative affairs, into passionate affairs, into compassionate affairs, into there's so many places to put that apart from. It's beautiful to have outrage, and then to have the maturity and the seasoning to know what to do with that energy.
That's beautiful.
And
what you just said.
Use it someplace else.
And to see it as an aspect, a very valid aspect, a very valuable aspect, and watch it come up in whatever way it comes up. But I think the part for me, the liberating part, is to unhook so much that I don't have to stick with it. It's like this, again, we've talked about the stories as being, I keep saying 9, I realize there's infinite stories, but let's just say 9 stories going on at the same time in my head. They're all true. They're all true. All 9 are true. All 9 are valid and valuable and worth discussing and worth expressing and so forth and so on. But not a single one of them is, even though they may contradict each other, is more true than the other. They're all true simultaneously. So I allow them to come up and come out. I watch them reflected back.
The one you feed the most energy to.
Yeah.
There is some apocryphal tale. I don't know who said it. I don't know where. I've heard it attributed to Native American. I've heard it attributed to other cultures. A story about a young boy sees 2 wolves.
Oh, yes. This is a great one. Sure.
Sees 2 wolves. Watch me mame it. So
that's right. I'll save you. I think I know the story well enough. I can probably save you.
And, a fierce, savage one and a tame one. And he says to his grandfather, which one is going to get me? And the grandfather says, whichever one you pay attention to.
Whichever one you feed.
Or no, whichever one you... See, I did name it.
That's okay.
Whichever one you feed. Which
yeah.
one...
And he actually says, I'm scared of becoming this one. And he says it's whichever one you feed.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I think the trick, though, is to allow for the one that's outraged. What you
I hope
said...
that story came through.
Well, it doesn't matter.
It up, but
yeah, it doesn't make
any
any difference. That this is an expression of outrage. And the outrage is valid. And then over here. And this is valid, and that is valid, and they're all valid. They're not. I really am not diminishing Occupy Wall Street at all. It's fine. It's up, and it's time for it to be up because it's here. And what does it mean? It's about people not feeling heard and seen and understood, feeling marginalized, not feeling like they have a voice. Fantastic. It's all those things, and then to personalize, pull it in. What does that mean for me? Where am I at? What part of me is coming up? Wow, because there's all these parts of me.
And how can you be with that?
How can I be with that? And how can I find a constructive way?
Mostly it's how can you be with that?
Because otherwise I have to, because when I lock into my position and I got, then I'm in, versus allowing it. It doesn't have to be right or wrong, good or bad. I'm over two-dimensional. We talk on this show all the time about dynamic complexity. We don't have to decide. We can allow for both, and they can be contradictory.
The dynamic complexity involves recognizing the, in this case, the trigger or the mirror.
Yes.
Acknowledging your relationship to the trigger or the mirror. Processing it through so that you can forgive and release it. Then choosing either to go forward into something unknown or to forget and lapse back into the same behaviors all over again.
Yeah.
And then moving forward to beginning to relate to a new sense of the unknown, but a holding of what is from a place of unknown, but an optimistic unknown. And then feeding that attention to a vision of possibility. Not not held so tightly that it becomes a frame, a brittle frame, but held as a placeholder. By that I mean in the case of Occupy Wall Street or the Tea Parties, that rather than they prevail, but that people feel their dignity and they feel that they're honored and they feel that we're seen and heard and they matter. And that when people matter, they are empowered to make livelihoods for themselves. And that we all feel that we are parties to a sense of community and that we're supported and we support each other and we are likewise supported. And that we live with our needs and our safeties and our requirements for security and well-being and health met. That's my vision that I'm holding and feeding. And then finally, that there is room for possibility beyond beyond, not so small, I'm not diminishing myself, but beyond my limitations.
Absolutely.
There's so much more available to come in. All of those balls are in the air. They are all simultaneous, and although they are a sequence, they are also something that happens simultaneously. That's the complexity. This is really a simultaneous complexity.
Okay.